Our U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling to Jamaica today. He's heading to an emergency meeting with Caribbean leaders on the crisis in Haiti.
And of course, that follows U.S. military evacuating some personnel from the U.S. Embassy in the capital of Port-au-Prince over the weekend. The European Union and Germany have also evacuated staff as gang violence escalates across that country. The U.S. military deploying additional security to Haiti, and the U.S. Embassy there does remain open. CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez has more on this right now. Manny, good to see you. So the situation in Haiti has been unstable for a number of months now. So what prompted this latest move, the U.S. military evacuating embassy staff over the weekend?
Well, that just really speaks to the dire situation on the ground there in Haiti, that the U.S. Saw it fit to remove non-essential personnel from the U.S. Embassy there, and also to send in reinforcements to beef up security there. And the fact that you have the Secretary of State now at an emergency meeting of Caribbean nations trying to figure out what can be done. For years now, Haiti has been in the grips of gang violence, but these gangs have only grown more powerful. And over the last week, what happened is the prime minister went overseas to try to seek international help, a security force. Well, these gangs saw the opportunity to even take over more of the capital, including trying to take over the airport and preventing the prime minister from returning. They want him to resign, or they're threatening civil war, they said, and genocide. At this point, no indication that he will resign. So that's part of the political calculus here that the United States is trying to weigh at the moment, is how to deal with the prime minister, what guidance, if anything, they should give to him, whether they should ask him to step down. The United States has not made that an official position. But in the meantime, you have scores of Haitians that are caught in the middle of this. You have hospitals that have been shut down. The food that was already scarce is even more scarce now, as people are either displaced or hunkering down in their homes.
Manny, Sheila Surfalis McCormick, a Democratic congresswoman who serves as a co-chair of the Haiti caucus, really underscored the importance of implementing some type of justice system in Haiti. Here's how she explained that.
Without justice, these gangs would just lay dormant and come right back when they have an actual election and start terrorizing the people. We've seen this habit over and over again. We need to have a justice system implemented within the Transition Council, and also start looking at an international tribunal to actually prosecute the gang members.
It's an ambitious, I guess, option to get to, but in the meantime, Manny, what is the U.S. doing right now to help the people of Haiti?
Well, for years, the U.S. has contributed in terms of aid, millions of dollars of aid, either to fight hunger or to fight diseases. But the U.S. has been loath at this point to do anything that would include possibly putting U.S. troops on the ground. That doesn't seem to be part of the equation right now. So the U.S. has said that it will try to finance any possible mission that would bring some sort of security or stability to Haiti. What exactly that will mean? Well, that may be something that comes out of this meeting that is happening today in Jamaica, this meeting of the Caribbean nations there, CARICOM. But really, it's all up in the air at this point. And I think so many of the elected officials who have family in Haiti, or many here in South Florida, where there's a sizable Haitian American community, are concerned about family members, really, that are back there right now, struggling, just trying to stay safe. And there's also the possibility that you might have an outflow of people, of refugees from this turmoil, either trying to get into the Dominican Republic, other Caribbean nations. And as we know, here in South Florida, there have been boats that have arrived in past years with Haitians trying to flee the violence there. So all of these are concerns that are factoring in right now.
All right, Manny, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.